Okay, so welcome to the Co-Creative Sex Summit podcast series. I'm super excited today on this Wednesday because I have a very, very special guest. Her name is Devi Erickson. She is a pioneer in sexuality internationally, globally, originally from the US, now in Canada. And she has just pioneered the first ever Tantra school to be recognized by higher institutions of learning. So that is really impressive. This is the first around the world. And so I'm also very excited because for a few reasons. She was one of the first people I started interviewing for my book when I started my whole journey that has now become the book Sex Up Your Life, the mind-blowing path to true intimacy, healing, and hope. And she was a great inspiration with her stories as I collected many, many stories from different people. And as I create this continuum from, completely disconnected sex all the way up to blissfully connected sex, I needed people who had a wide range of experiences. And Devi's kind of the one who's gone from like the bottom of the continuum from disconnect all the way up to like those high levels of blissful transcendent experiences that you can also have in sex. So she's been this amazing person in terms of like, so much to offer and so much to share about her life story and how it can really help people. And also the other reason why I'm super excited to have her on the call today is because she's going to be one of our guest facilitators at the Co-Creative Sex Summit, 14th, 15th, and 16th of February. And this is really special because Devi, her institute really works with training the future tantrikas, the future educators of Tantra. And so she doesn't work as much with just the public anymore. So it's a real honor when she does, because she's one of these like really precious walking, like encyclopedias for sexuality. And not to say that she also has Sex as Medicine, the podcast series that has been going on for how many years now?
Oh, good Lord. I think it's going on 7, 8 years now.
So imagine 7 years worth of like interviews of like all kinds of people and just this massive amount of knowledge that's in there. So she's just been collecting and just has so much experience. It's not only just, for me, I'm always looking at people who've collected knowledge, but also who've through their life had to transform. And that's one thing that Devi has done so powerfully in her life. So I want us to go dive into some of her story because it's really rich. But one of the topics we really want to take on today is looking at how our sexual energy will imprint a lot of different things, including any like sort of historical trauma that will come and be inherited. So whether it be racism, whether it be not being accepted for who you are for your sexuality, whether it be, there's many different ways of historical, cultural, familial imprinting that comes in and imprints how we experience our sexuality. So Devi is a wonderful person to talk to us about that. So welcome, Devi.
Thank you for having me with a wonderful, wonderful introduction. So I'm so delighted to be here sharing with everyone today.
The other piece that I did not mention was that Devi was also helped me when I was kind of at a point in my life where I was like, you know what? I really need to just take this question of sexuality on because I feel so numb in my life. I feel, is that an orgasm? Is that, I was so shut down in my sexuality. And I knew that there was something missing for me. And I knew I was a very central person. I knew I had all these things about me, but there was something I wasn't getting. So I actually took a 3-month program with Devi and got coaching with her and worked through all kinds of things with her. So I got to receive some of the teachings and the liberation really that you experience when you do take on this question of sexuality. So thank you, Devi. I would love it if you wanted to say anything else about you that you would love people to hear.
Yay. Well, thanks for joining us today. And it's wonderful to be here sharing with you. And I'm not really good with things like off the top of my head of like, I want you to know this about me. I'm just looking forward to sharing. Yes, I'm looking forward to sharing.
So let's look into a little bit about your life journey. I mean, it's been one of these, like I was telling on the post that I wrote, that you at one point you thought of committing suicide. You've experienced, I didn't write this in the post, but you've I write this in my book though, about how you were living in Michigan at one point, just down the street from the Grand Dragon of the KKK, and you had people that were spitting on you because of what you look like. And this was not the case for all your life. You had some moments where that did not exist. So when it happened, it was like a real shock to your system. So there's these different sort of things that happen to in your childhood. And I'd love you just to share a little bit about what that journey looked like in terms of growing up as a biracial woman in the US.
Yeah, it's often challenging to articulate that experience, and I continue to uncover the depth and profundity of the trauma of what it was like to be born when I was born, and to grow up in this world biracial. And just, to put in some context, I was born in 1974. And if I had been born 5 years earlier, I would have been illegal. So that's something that a lot of people don't think of, but like my very existence on this planet was illegal according to United States law. So, 5 years from changing a law, we know that, laws are just kind of symbolic of what's in the mass consciousness of the time. So for many people, growing up my entire life, I was an abomination. My parents divorced when I was very, very young. I grew up in a home, my early childhood years, of domestic violence. There were some beautiful, beautiful pieces of my childhood. Like I started school at Rutgers Prep for preschool and Montessori. You're a Montessori school teacher. And so we have that, that was a point of interest and a point of connection for us. But my parents divorced very, very young. And when they were together in the house, my father was very physically abusive. And as we know, that type of violence in the household is going to imprint on us in our nervous system. The more I learn about developmental trauma, the more I am aware of the profundity, the profound impact that our early childhood experiences have on our ability to be healthy and functional adults and form healthy, functional relationships. And so my childhood was really marred by pain. And a lot of that pain, from my point of view, looking back with the knowledge that I have now as an adult and looking at my father and my mother and their dynamics, I see how racism played such a central role in the disintegration of my family and the mental unwellness and emotional unwellness, particularly of my father, who was a victim of racism for most of his life. So
you want to give a little picture of like what your dad had to deal with?
Yeah, so I think I shared this with you before. So again, this is like in the late 60s, early 70s. And my father was a very intelligent, highly educated human being. He was brilliant. When he died, he was fluent in Japanese, had received a master's in Asian studies, and was really pursuing a career. His dream before he passed was to be a translator for the Canadian government. He wasn't Canadian, he just loved Canada. So here I am now. But growing up at that time, my father would go, they still did job interviews like on the phone, right? So he'd call for a job interview, he'd submit an application, and they'd call him on the phone, and he'd talk on the phone. And the heads of these companies would be like, oh my God, we can't wait to meet you. Like you basically, the deal is sealed, you have a job, like just come in and we'll finalize the paperwork. And he'd walk in, and the moment they saw that he was Black, their faces would fall and they'd say, sorry, the position's been filled. Mm-hmm. Even though he was there to sign the paperwork for the position. Yeah. So that happened over and over again to him. And I didn't know that for most of my life growing up. My mother shared that with me, a few years ago. But the impact of that, I mean, that's just a small, tiny thing. But the impact of that on a human being who has all the skills and the tools necessary for realization and fulfillment, and to use their talents and their gifts to, build a career and provide for their family, and all of that like beauty and energy and momentum, to have it continuously squashed over and over and over again because of the color of your skin was absolutely devastating to him. And as I said, that was just one tiny, like, I guess in today's society it would be called a microaggression. It's a macroaggression, right? But there's just one tiny piece of the puzzle that over and over and over again destroyed his spirit, truly did, destroyed his spirit, crushed his spirit. And so from my point of view, there were so many instances, and being a survivor of racial trauma myself, I understand to a degree how that consistent, continuous, ongoing dehumanization of you as an individual, again, is soul crushing, and how it lodges in the nervous system and is literally a trauma. And so we start to develop, PTSD, behavioral issues, emotional issues, mental health issues, just not living life in a state of openness and joy and possibility, living a life with your spirit under assault on a regular basis. And that's, that's not just 40 years ago, that's every day for many people of color in this country, in the United States, particularly in this day and age. So it imprints anything that affects our humanity, affects our sexuality, because our sexuality is inseparable from our humanity. In fact, it is the reason we are here as humans. It's the very reason we're here as humans, is because of our sexuality. So all of these soul crushing experiences that we have, or painful experiences that we have, weave into and impact and color our experience of sexuality as human beings, and our worth and our value.
Totally. So can you share with us a little bit about where you were seeing your self-worth, like your issues around self-worth? How was it showing up in your life? Because there's experiences where you were like, you were not feeling good about yourself, and it was showing up in specific places in your life.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, circling back to knowing that when you were born, you were technically not allowed to be alive. That's going to have an impact on your self-worth. And then because my parents split at such an early age, my mom's white, my dad was black. Typically, children go to their moms. So I was with my mother, and I lived and grew up in mostly white, upper middle class neighborhoods. And so I was told, and I was very, very often the only person of color in my class, sometimes even in my school. Maybe there was like one or two other people of color, maybe one other black person, and then some East Indian people, but very, very segregated. Like the United States is very segregated, and even more so back in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I grew up with a message that I was ugly, that I was disgusting, that I did not deserve to be alive, that I was worthless because I was black. Mm-hmm. Because I had kinky hair and big lips, and yes, my skin is light, but there's no hiding my heritage, nor would I want to. But I grew up with a message that not only, legally by American law was I, just granted permission to exist on this planet, but the communities that I lived in growing up fed me the message from the time I was little that there was something wrong with me because I was black.
Could you give us one little anecdote that kind of illustrates that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you have this in your book or not, but one of the anecdotes is I always had a crush on little white boys. That's part of my cultural conditioning as well. So I always had crushes on these little white boys. And there weren't any black boys around to have crushes on either. So there you go. But this one boy in particular, I really had a crush on. I think I was like, I don't know, maybe like nine-ish. And I remember telling a friend of mine that he was so beautiful that when he died, I thought he should be put in a glass casket surrounded by flowers. It was all like very romantic, and so that we could come and gaze upon his beautiful face, blah, blah, blah. And he apparently heard that I said that, and he said that, well, I think she's so fucking ugly. Such a fucking ugly N-word, I'm not going to say it on Facebook, that when she dies, we should burn off all her frizzy N-word hair and, basically burn her body so that nobody else would have to be subjected to their eyeballs melting in their face from my hideousness. So I think, I share that because I think a lot of people don't really understand the brutality and the intensity of racial violence that some people of color are exposed to on an everyday basis. So, there are black people being killed every day by officers of the law. That's nothing new. that's in fact, law enforcement was created to control and manage black people in this country. But particularly, like for me as a light-skinned Black person and growing up in segregated neighborhoods that were predominantly white, these were wealthy white people that were saying this to me. These were our senators and our congresspeople and doctors and heads of companies. These were the people, these were their children who were saying to me that I was disgusting and didn't deserve to be alive because I was Black. Mm-hmm. This was in 1980s. So this is recent. This is in our lifetime. Right. And it's brutal and it's violent and it's abusive and it's traumatizing. Yeah. And it's something that, again, not many people have a context for when they say, oh, well, I don't see color and racism doesn't exist. Well, try growing up as a person of color in white society.
Yeah. So how did this play out in your sexuality after, like, these messages, you received these messages? How did it play out in your sexuality?
Well, I mean, our sexuality, who we choose to engage with, how we choose to engage is very much determined by our self-worth, how we feel about ourselves. Sexuality, I mean, there's so many facets to it. There's the aspect of, just the human urge, the biological desire. And then there's the emotion, and then there's, the psychology of it. So there's all these many facets and layers of human sexuality and how we define and view ourselves as sexual beings. And so if I have no intrinsic worth or value, neither does my sexuality. So having, boundary issues, risky sexual behavior, having sex with people who did not value me at all, being willing to compromise or sacrifice my own integrity, because I've often thought that sex was the only way that I could get attention, or that my need for approval or acceptance would be met. Very, disconnected from my pleasure in my body. That's the impact that trauma has, regardless of the type, whether it's sexual, emotional, spiritual, whatever. It prevents us from connecting to our wholeness. Yeah. And our inner wisdom and truth. And so I was deeply disassociated and deeply disconnected from that for a variety of reasons. The racial trauma is just one of the many layers of trauma that I endured as a young being. And so not having any connection to my and I say this, and it's such a heady concept, but for those of us who have experienced what it's like to be disconnected from your body, it feels empty. It feels numb. It feels lifeless. It feels shallow. Because I was disconnected from my body, no understanding of pleasure or being able to advocate for pleasure. It was like, any sexual experience, it was about the guy. It was about the partner. It wasn't about me. It was about me performing so that my needs for acceptance and approval would be met. Giving myself sexually to some of these racist young boys, right? That's how low my self-worth was. Oh, you hate me and don't think I deserve to live. Well, let me come have sex with you. Right. I think on the down low, I was really trying to fuck them into enlightenment. That's what I think I was trying to do. But I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. Because I remember you telling me how for you, sexuality is always something that was really alive and part of you. And there was that part of you did not have shame.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, I guess it's like looking back, we have different lenses as we go through things. So I remember, it's very, very dualistic. So on one hand, looking back, given where I am now, right? So given where I am now with this union of bliss, I look back and all I see is how disassociated I was and how little of that there was because of my perspective now. Yeah. I think I knew spiritually, I'm going to say I knew spiritually, and I knew not necessarily intellectually, but emotionally, I understood that there was more to human sexuality than was being made available to us. I always knew that. I remember having conversations with my father when I was like 10 years old. Yeah. I didn't know much about human sexuality. I just knew that when my father told me it was about procreation, he was wrong. Right. That's what I knew. I knew that there was more. I also knew that gender was irrelevant. I remember being really, really little and finding out that my puppy was a girl. and being devastated because I had just bought into, I remember literally remember thinking this to myself, all right, well, I'm willing to believe this boy girl thing for humans, like, since that's the game we're playing, but I was devastated that we projected that onto animals. I thought it was so unfair to limit them like that. So I remember having conversations with my father about my belief that we as human beings are meant to love regardless of what kind of genitals we have, right? And I didn't know what the word bisexual meant at that time because I was like 10 or 11.
Right.
Different cultural climate at the time. But I remember very much knowing that there was more to our sexual expression as humans than the limited view that I could see around me, and having philosophical discussions with my father at a very early age about that.
Yeah. So let's just look at that moment where, like, you were at that point of your life where you're at the lowest place in your life. Like, what did that look like?
The lowest point of my life, I was 20, I think, 1920-ish. I was living alone in Detroit, and I was a stripper at the time, and I was going to Wayne State University as a theater major. And it's interesting because it was very tied into my spiritual growth and awakening. So I had encountered some spiritual teachings. I think the book was called Bringers of the Dawn. And I was reading this book, and it was waking up all this awareness inside of me of like, that there's more to life than meets the eye. And very validating and activating for me to realize, hey, I'm not alone. Like, I'm not crazy. My sense that there's something more to sexuality, to life, to being human, my sense that there's something more is correct and valid. So that was going on at the same time as me being really entrenched with all this, sexual abuse trauma, physical abuse trauma, racial trauma, constantly being sexually assaulted at work, because that's part of my job as a stripper. We don't think of that. It's like, oh, well, you're asking for it at your job, but having people touch me constantly without my consent. So all of that was in there, unrecognized. I didn't understand what was going on because we don't have language for that, and just kind of like a heavy burden. And at the same time, there was this possibility of hope and awakening. And at that time, at that moment when I decided to, and it was my first, I would say, it wasn't my first serious suicide attempt, but it was the first time I probably actually really could have killed myself. Previous suicide attempts, and the suicide attempts are pretty normal for trauma survivors. Self-harm, they were more like self-harm experiences. But in this particular case, I was really committed. I was really serious about it. And the actions that I was taking would have ended my life. It would have been more than a stomach pump at the hospital. Mm-hmm. So in that moment, I was in this state of conflict between hope and possibility and the weight and the oppression of unrecognized, unresolved, unhealed trauma. And as this energy of awakening started to arise, it hit into that oppression, that weight, and I lost hope, I guess is the point. I lost hope in my own ability to overcome and to realize the truth that I was starting to understand was more than just my truth. So I lost hope in my ability to actually become realized, become self-actualized. And so at that time, at that moment, I felt that the most important, or not the most important, that the only choice available for me was to end this life and start a new one. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what I know now about reincarnation. That would not have worked, but but that was it. I figured, well, this one's a wash. There's too much awfulness happening in this world. I'll never make it in this body. I need to get rid of this body and get a new one. That was my plan of action.
Right.
So that was that moment, and it was definitely the darkest moment of my life. Obviously, I didn't kill myself.
How did it go?
Obviously, it went well because I survived it. But I will say that the impact of that, the importance of that, for me at least, was my bottom. And like when we swim and we touch bottom, we can use that bottom as leverage to shoot back up to the surface. And so that's what that was for me. That was that moment of bottom. And when I knew that I was not actually ever going to kill myself, like that was my do or die. I had been flirting with that idea for about 5 years. I'd been threatening. I'd been like, well, if this doesn't work, I can always kill myself, hey, plan B. So this experience, and not to be cavalier about it, but that was just kind of the thinking in my mind. So this experience showed me that, well, Davey, you're kind of bullshitting yourself. You're not actually going to kill yourself when push comes to shove. And I do want to make a point that the reason I did not do it in that moment was because I knew the impact that it would have on my mother. I knew that no matter what I said or whatever I wrote in my suicide note about my own pain and my own suffering, and it wasn't their fault, because that was my whole suicide note. It's like, it's not your fault, don't blame yourself, blah, blah, blah. I knew that no matter what I said, it would be devastating for my family, and that my mother would never forgive herself, that she would blame herself. And I could not do that to my mother. I couldn't let my pain and my inability to deal with my own pain impact my mother. I couldn't let her take the blame for that. So that's what stopped me. And once I realized that, so it wasn't just like, oh, I want to, I don't want to. Once I realized I cannot do that to the people in my life, it was no longer a plan B. I had no choice but to live. And I had no choice but to learn to live free of pain, because the pain that I was in at that point in my life and every moment of every day was excruciating. It is indescribable. It is like being crushed by a boulder every moment of every day. It's like being plagued by the hounds of hell. It was excruciating.
Like, when your very existence doesn't feel like it's welcomed and loved, it's like you're like where do you fit in the world? Where do you fit in the world?
Where do you fit in the world? And why be a part of a world that has rejected you from the day that you were born? This world has told me you don't belong here from the day I was born. Why would I want to be a part of that? Right?
Yeah.
So I knew that was no longer an option. So I needed to find a way to make this world mine, to make my way in this world. And that is what began my spiritual journey, my seeking. And I'm a Scorpio. And when I commit to something, I commit 100%. And so
like Tauruses.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. And so I committed to self-realization. I committed to find a way to live in this body on this planet free of pain. And that took me on my journey. I just followed the golden thread that eventually led me to Tantra, Tibetan Buddhist Tantra, and then has allowed me to live the life that I live now, which is exquisite.
Yeah. So before we go into the Tantra piece, share us a little bit about, because you went through a whole meditation period of like sort of ascendance kind of approach of, I think it's transcendental or ascendance. I forget what the term.
Yeah, ascension meditation. Yeah. So I was a monk. And so that was part of it. So at that moment, when I realized I was going to live, or made the choice to live, I committed my life to my spiritual realization, because for me, that was the only way that I was going to get out of pain. For me, getting out of pain wasn't about finding a good job, right? Or whatever. It was about finding God. That's what it was about for me. It was about finding God. So I followed that thread. I mean, I did lots.
You're like, I want to find the creators. I can have a conversation with them. Do I fit in here or not?
Yeah, or union, like find union, right?
Yeah.
So that led me into like natural healing, herbal healing, crystal healing, like all the new age woo-woo things I tried as an opportunity or as a potential tool to help alleviate the suffering. And they all, some worked, some didn't. They, had their varying degrees of efficacy. Eventually, I made my way to North Carolina and became a monk of the Ashaya order. And that's actually where I received the name Devi. So we went through a period of 3 days of fasting and silence. I took vows. I committed my life to my spiritual path. I wore only white for several years. I received the name Devi Ashaya. And I was trained to be a teacher of ascension meditation, which I did for several years.
Yeah.
And so I was, at the tender age of 24, I literally took vows and committed my life to God, or, whatever word, Buddha, whatever word you want to put there. I'm not attached to the word. I committed my life to realization.
Right.
And this is part of it for me. This is completely congruent with that.
So at what point did the Shia order become like stifling for you, or like you were like, this is not exactly it? What point, when did that happen?
Well, I mean, I don't know that that ever actually happened, that it became stifling. And I said, goodbye to ascension because you suck. It was more, I found something greater. I
Mm,
found a tool that was more effective. So I was in the Shaya right up until the day I encountered Tantric Buddhism. And in fact, I had a chat with my lama about, okay, I'm doing this, this monk path kind of thing. And as monks, we were able to engage sexually. We took a brahmacharya, self-restraint or celibacy vow is how most people interpret it. But we took a brahmacharya vow in our first year of vows. And then after that, we could choose to continue the brahmacharya vow or not. And I did not. So I just want to clarify that as a monk, I was still sexually active. I was not sexually educated. I was not sexually healed, but I was sexually active, right?
mm.
And so I was actively practicing the Ashaya's ascension meditation up until I encountered Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. And so I had a conversation very early in, after a few months of practicing the Tibetan Tantric Buddhism and experiencing the results. I was like, okay, well, do these two paths, are these two paths compatible? Can I do both?
Right.
And my lama said, no, actually, you can't. You have to choose. You're going in two totally different directions. So, there's nothing wrong with the path that you're on. It sounds like a nice path. I hear that. And so if that's comfortable for you, then great. And if you want to do this other thing, you can't do that too. You can't do them both. You can't mix medicines.
And where does it fit in this the sort of sacred erotic dance?
Hmm.
Was it in that period as well?
Yeah, so sacred erotic dance was developed after I left the ashram or the monastery. So, the ashram in North Carolina, I lived for a few years there, but teachers were really encouraged to branch out, right? So when you left the ashram, it wasn't like you were leaving the group or leaving the organization. It was that you were being sent out to teach and to build communities elsewhere. And so, so I was out living in the world, and I was living in Iowa, and I was really started to like kind of dig into my sexuality. I was dating a guy at the time who was into neo-tantra, and so he was really interested in exploring sexual expression. And when I was in a Shaya monk, I'd really let go of my dance. And so now that I was no longer living, as part of the community and I was kind of on my own, I started to explore my self-expression through movement and dance. And so my dance has always been erotic and sensual. From the time I was little, that was the case. When I was a stripper in Detroit, it became more refined and more detailed and more directly erotic. And so when I was living in Iowa and I was living with this guy and we were just kind of like all about, exploring our sensuality, I would just put on music and I would play. And I would dance, and I began to develop and explore different ways that the body could move that were visually erotic and felt somatically erotic. And I developed the system of sacred erotic dance, which for me was this fusion and this union of my experience as a stripper, my sexuality, and then my experience as a monk, which was my spirituality. So it was this fusion of both, or this blending of both. And so I just created structure around it. I developed the 5 core pelvic movements because the human pelvis can only move in a certain number, so many different ways. There are variations on the theme, but the core movements are very set in regards to the way the body can actually move. And so I developed a structure around that and a teaching style around that. And then shortly thereafter, I moved to Hawaii. And it was really cool because the first day I landed on Hawaii, there were some Shaya monks there. And so I had like what we call a soft landing. Like they welcomed me into the community and, met people and whatever. So like it was like either the first or the second night I was there, I was invited to a party. And the woman who was having the party was an owner of a yoga studio. And she saw me dancing because it was a dance party. And she's like, oh my God, can you teach us dance at the yoga studio? And I was like, oh my God, yeah, because I just developed this thing called sacred erotic dance. And so that's actually how I got my start teaching. Sacred erotic dance was from this, fluke at a party. Someone saw me dancing and invited me to teach at their studio.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember just being in a room where you're teaching these different things, and there's men and women, and it was like we were all partnered up, and we had these different challenges. And I just remember how it just awakened the whole room. Everyone was just like alive, and there's just this really nice sensation of fun and play and just aliveness. And yeah, I was just like, wow, this is a real tool to like just, get connected to ourselves.
It's a really fun, and I think it's a really, I call it like the gateway drug to Tantra or sexual Tantra. It's a really fun and accessible way to start playing with and exploring our sensuality and our sensual self-expression, because it's so constrained in this culture and it's so commercialized. Like what we view as sexy is really, told to us. We're given very little opportunity for us to explore it for ourselves. Like, what is
I
sex?
love that you're saying that. Like there's this imagery put out in the world of like, how we should be if we want to be sexual. And in fact, it then you adopt it almost like as a costume.
Yeah.
But it's a different thing when it comes and is generated from an inner experience, and to how you feel integrated as a human being when it does come and be generated from inside.
Exactly, from the inside out. And it's a very personal, very unique thing. Like what feels sexy in my body may or may not show up for you. You may or may not interpret that as sexy, but what's important is the way I feel, my connection to my sexuality, my sensuality, because they're not the same thing, and how I work with that energy in my body. So sacred erotic dance is a really playful and fun tool for doing that. It gives people an opportunity to just kind of explore movement and explore specifically sensual and specifically erotic movement in a really safe space.
And it's so funny because when we think erotic and dance, we often think women, but this is not just for women, right?
No, it's for human beings.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, definitely, because I have a vagina and I identify as a woman, very obviously, most of my target market for this has been women. But there's such huge freedom in male-bodied beings being able to unlock their sensuality through movement and play with it. That's the most important piece, because there's so much intensity and heaviness and stuff around sex. But the playfulness and the joy and the curiosity and the creativity can sometimes get lost. So that's what I love about this particular modality.
Yeah, because I think a lot of what people experience oftentimes when they are feeling disconnected is that they're stuck in their heads.
Exactly.
Like little talking heads, and we've been trained at universities and to think and to plan and to have strategies and to plan budgets, and it's all here. But like, what does it feel like when you're getting connected to your whole body, right? So
Yeah.
it sort of brings everything together in one piece.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're designed to be integrated as humans, body, mind, spirit, sex. Like that's the human blueprint, that's the human design. And yet, for a variety of reasons, those pieces often get separated out and disconnected, and then we wonder why we're sick. And we're not functioning.
The human blueprint.
Yeah,
that one.
Yeah.
Cool. And so then you went into Tantra. It was a pretty revolutionary experience. So what was that first experience like?
Yeah. So I did not seek Tantra out. Tantra, Tibetan Buddhist Tantra, I will specify, literally found me. It landed in my lap. And so I was working with a healer on Kauai who was a student of Lama Tashi. And this healer had studied Neo-Tantra and Taoist Tantra and East Indian Tantra. And then he encountered Lama Tashi about 5 or 6 years previous to he and I meeting, to my mentor and I meeting. And Lama Tashi gave him specific tantric sexual teachings from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and gave him permission or encouraged him, I don't want to say give him permission, encouraged him to cultivate these teachings. And after, and so many years passed while he was doing this. And then my mentor and our paths crossed, and he worked with me on some health issues that I was having. And as my energy began to shift and heal, and as I began to get results from these Buddhist practices, which were part of my healing regimen, I became curious about this sexual Tantra that this person was talking to me about. And the reason that I said yes to the opportunity to train with him was because he presented this opportunity to me as a way to, as the foundational instructions from this lineage on how to harness human sexual energy and use it for healing and enlightenment. And that's why I said yes, because at the time, I was not interested in better sex. I thought my sex was fine. I never had orgasms. I could maybe have a clitoral orgasm if I strained really hard and held my breath and really focused. Did not have vaginal orgasms with my partner. I mean, I was wounded and conditioned and traumatized, and that was normal. And that was the biggest revelation for me throughout my entire Tantra training, was how much of what we consider normal is actually trauma in this society. Like, not just sexually, but overall, but particularly sexually. How much of what we consider normal or conventional sexuality is actually crippled. It's actually
like, I just
degenerative.
see that image of like the little, red goldfish in the aquarium, and they're just in the water and they don't know what they're in.
Exactly.
So used to
Exactly. Yeah, it's what we swim within. So we're unaware of that. And so when I said yes to training in Tantra, it was not sexually motivated for me at all. It was, for me, the one thing I hadn't tried. I had tried everything else. I had tried crystals. I had tried Reiki. I mean, I was a level 3 Reiki practitioner at 19. I mean, I'd done all the things, therapy, all the things. And all of them were absolutely very useful. But nothing had really, nothing had offered complete resolution. Nothing had resulted in complete transformation. It took the edge off the pain, but it did not completely antidote the pain. And that's what I was still looking for. And I wanted realization. I mean, I committed myself at 24 to knowing God. I wanted to know God. That's what I wanted to do. And if sexual pleasure could be a gateway to that, well, I was down to try. So I agreed to enter into 3 months of formal training with this person. So it was like, bookend. It had an expiry date. It was just meant to be this training program. And then at the end of that, I would see what would happen after that. But it seemed like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And particularly because the methods that he was going to share with me were lineage based. They were from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. These were teachings on literally, as I said, how to harness human sexual energy and use it for the purpose for which it was designed. And that was attractive. If it had just been about awakening my G-spot, well, I didn't give a fuck. I didn't know I had a G-spot. I could care less. Right. But if these practices were going to reveal the face of God to me, that I wanted to know.
And
so
what happened?
And so I committed myself to this entirely. And as I said, it was like nothing I could have imagined. And if I had known then what I know now, I probably would have said no, quite frankly. Yeah. Because it brought me face first and head first into my deepest wounding that I had spent my entire life trying to escape.
Yeah.
And I went there.
So what does that look like when you go there?
And over again.
What does that look like when you go there?
Well, it depends on the context. I mean, sometimes it looked like me sitting in a chair with my legs spread open and somebody's fingers in my vagina massaging my cervix as I'm screaming and crying in excruciating pain, and then orgasm, and then pain, and then orgasm, and then pain, and then orgasm, and then tears. It looked like that sometimes. Sometimes it looked like I'm not being able to sleep because my head was spinning so hard and I was reliving, all the violence and abuse I'd experienced as a child, and it was coming out of my body. Last week, it looked like me not being able to walk for an entire day because I was somatically releasing some of my ancestral trauma from one of my great grandmother, the first slave off the ship. And I was releasing some pain, trauma in my bones. And the entire day, I couldn't put any weight on my right leg as that trauma expressed itself through my cells and through my body. So it can look like a variety of different things.
Yeah. And so just to give people listening this idea, so once you go through that and you purge it out, what is accessible to you after? Like, how do you know you've released it?
Yeah. Well, because there's bliss. Yeah. What is the opposite of pain? Pleasure. What is the opposite of unrealization? Realization. What is the opposite of, suffering? Bliss. So on the other side of all that, the value of walking through hell to reclaim your soul is that you get your soul. You actually get your soul. It's not like you're stuck in suffering the rest of your life, like, oh, it's just suffering. No, it's a healing process. Numb, pain, irritation, sensation, pleasure. So on the other side of that is a whole new universe of potential. And what I would say for me is the most remarkable is freedom. I do not give a fuck anymore. I just do not give a fuck what people think, what people say. It's irrelevant because I am right with God. I know my mission. I know my alignment. I know with clarity my purpose here on this planet. I am here to do the work. And that's what we're here for. We're here for that. And I have the freedom, the internal freedom and the energy and the vitality and the joy to do it, not as if it's a labor, but as if it's an expression of love.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. So what, like, now that you're in that place, even, you saw some benefits in terms of like your life transforming. There's like a possibility of, having your own home and just like living the life you really desire. So when you get to that place of bliss, after having felt so, constricted and heavy, just can you give us a little more of an experience of what that bliss is? Like, what is that feeling? What does that feel like?
Well, I think it's so individual for each of us. So like, I'm going to invite all of us to imagine a point in our life where everything felt in balance and harmony, as if every move you made was a dance, as if every word you spoke was the voice of God, where it was all in alignment and harmony and attunement. And it was like this, it was just peace, quite frankly, just peace. And so having lived my entire life feeling as if the hounds of hell were nipping at my heels, for me, bliss is being able to go through my life at peace without all those conflicting voices, without all that internal dialogue, all the like the right and the wrong and the looking back, and how we twist ourselves into these knots inside throughout the day. And it's just this twisting and churning. Instead, there's openness.
Yeah.
There's
I keep on experiencing like this sense of expansion.
Yeah,
like,
it's space.
That you were in was so small, and now it's like really big. And
it's like flying. Room. It's like flying. That's what it feels like. Bliss is flying.
Yeah. Now, is this something you experience at certain moments, like when you're having sex, or is it something that you experience in your daily life?
It's all pervasive.
Yeah.
And the thing is that our, again, the way we often talk about it, there's sex and then there's our life. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So
give us more to that. Like, why is sex and life like this?
Because we're humans. Because if you, I always go back to children and how children have no shame about their bodies or their genitals or pleasure. And there's no separation. They'll be sitting at the table masturbating. There's no like, they have to be taught to do that in the bedroom. That we're taught to compartmentalize our sexuality. We're taught that there's a time and a place for it, and it's not now, right? And and granted, I don't want to go into the whole like ethical arguments about it, but that's just an example that the way we're born is there's no separation of sex and life. We will masturbate at the dinner table. If we're left to our own at 3 years old, we will. So what is happening in my sexuality, my ability to be present, my ability to receive, my ability to advocate, my ability to open, my ability to, be present through intensity of emotion and intensity of sensation, my ability to communicate, all of that, all of those skills and tools are accessed and cultivated in my everyday life. And they also are, they're just not separate. The more I'm willing to advocate for my pleasure in the bedroom, the more I'm willing to advocate for my pleasure in the boardroom, so to speak, and vice versa. We're never just doing this one thing here, because we are holistic as human beings. What I do here is what I do here is what I do here. Patterns.
So I remember once when we were in our interview process, you were telling me, yeah, like today you made this really big statement. You said, most pussies are dead, and the process of Tantra allows them to come back to life and like have that aliveness. And I'm just thinking of like, a desert compared to like this like forest life,
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about like, why do people walk around with pussies that are dead?
Oh my God, wow, there's like people can write dissertations on this. So I'll speak from my perspective. Again, everything's multifaceted. There's never one thing that's going on. It's always multiple layers and levels. So, there's a variety of reasons. One of them, like I expressed, is trauma, so whether that's the direct overt trauma, like sexual trauma or sexual abuse, 1 in 4 women has experienced some form of sexual trauma or sexual assault in her lifetime. That's a huge number, 1 in 4. So there's a lot of women, yoni owners walking around who have traumatized vaginas. And that's from overt trauma. Then there's the microaggressions or the micro traumas that occur naturally in our everyday life. Being constantly told that our vaginas smell bad, being told that we have to look in a certain way, being catcalled, being told good girls don't feel pleasure. Religious conditioning plays a huge part in shutting down our connection to our sexual essence. So cultural conditioning is one thing. There can be, physical toxins or physiological issues. Something that's very, very common that I run into a lot in my work is a lot of women thinking that their vaginas are broken because they can't have an orgasm, a vaginal orgasm, in 2 to 7 minutes. Well, not understanding our anatomy and how our bodies have all this internal erectile tissue that is crucial to our pleasure. And if our sexual experiences are over in 7 minutes, well, we don't even have a hard on yet. So how are you going to have vaginal orgasm if your yoni's not even erect? You're not even hard yet. Yeah. So I think there's so many factors that play into this desensitization and this numbing and this shutting down. And also, I'm going to say in this culture, female sexuality is under direct assault. Like it is, at least in the United States. I would say in other places. I mean, other places, little girls have their clitorises cut off, so they can't feel pleasure, right? In the United States, particularly, women's, or I will say, reproductive rights and yoni owners' rights to pleasure and to their own reproductive health is being criminalized and targeted. And so that has an impact on us. I mean, it's not, again, we don't live in a vacuum. And so it's affecting society, is affecting me as an individual.
So what do people get when they come to your workshop at the Co-Creative Sex Summit?
Oh, yay. Okay, awesome. Whoops. So excited, I'm knocking things over. Well, the first workshop, we're going to do sacred erotic dance. And we're going to do an evolution of sacred erotic dance that developed for me when I started practicing Tibetan 5-element Tantra. So that's one of the pieces we didn't talk about is how, when I started practicing specifically Tibetan 5-element Tantra, how that wove into my movement, and how we wove the expression of the elemental energies married, I'll say, the expression of the elemental energies with some of the 5 core pelvic movements and movement patterns. So we're going to be exploring that. We're going to be exploring sensual movement as a healing art. And then in my next workshop, we're going to be decoding female sexual pleasure. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to say 15 different types of orgasm that we have documented, not just by my vagina, but by vaginas all around the world. 15 different types of female orgasm, and then how that's possible. If we are capable of having such orgasmic bliss, then why, or 70% roughly of yoni owners stating that they're non-orgasmic or they have difficulty achieving orgasm. So we're going to kind of unravel that and figure out what's going on there.
So who's this workshop for? Like who would benefit from this?
All human beings who are interested in yonis.
Awesome. I like to hear that.
Vaginas.
Awesome, David. Well, I just wanted everyone to just like experience how lively and powerful and just like inspirational Devi is, because she's gonna be adding so much, so much awareness and content and knowledge to our lives. So really, I want to invite you all to come and experience her workshops. And is there anything, Devi, you'd love to say before we part? Because the time has flown by.
Yeah, I did want to mention, as you mentioned at the beginning, I am tooting my own horn here because this I think is an expression of what's on the other side of trauma. So, keeping in mind that however many years ago, because I'm terrible at math at the top of my head, when I was in my 20s, I was ready to kill myself. I was ready to, I was done. I was done with life. And I chose to realize instead of demise, whatever.
I love it.
Like, whatever. And so here we are now today standing at this pinnacle. So I want to celebrate this, that we recently became the first and the only government certified school for tantric sexual healing on this planet. First and only. And not only is our school as an entirety, the Institute of Authentic Tantra Education, not only is the school certified by the Ministry of Education in Canada, but our Authentic Tantra Certification Training Program has been approved by the Ministry of Education as a valid vocational training instruction, or a valid vocational training program that leads to a clear career path.
Right.
And our classification for our graduates is practitioners of natural healing. And the classification, our code for the classification of programs is acupuncture and oriental medicine. So the Canadian government has officially recognized Tantra as an expression or a form of oriental medicine. That is huge, coming from a little girl who wanted to kill herself and was told that she didn't deserve to exist on this planet, to have achieved and accomplished this. It is huge. It's a game changer. I mean, it completely changes the face of Tantra in the West.
Well, what I love is like you as a kid having this experience of like listening to your father be like, no, but there's more to sex. And here you are allowing sex to be recognized as this valid part of humanity and healing at the sort of like institutional levels of society.
Exactly.
And creating this space where it doesn't have to be a shameful thing anymore. So that is humongous. And I just want to acknowledge you for like being this trooper and pioneer and groundbreaker and not scared of anything, really.
As I said, I do not give a fuck. That is freedom. It's like, all right, we have about 40 years left on this planet, so let's do this.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm so honored to know you and to be in contact with you, be your friend, to be inspired by you, learn from you, and just promote you, because it's just, I'd love people to have more of experience with you because you just have so many gifts to share. So thank you. I'm excited you're part of our faculty of amazing facilitators at the Co-Creative Sex Summit. And I know that you're gonna really get along and have fun getting to know all the other people. I know you're already friends with Destin, but I think you're gonna discover some other great human people, human souls that are just beautiful. So
I am delighted to be able to connect with other troopers,
yeah.
other pioneers.
They're actually, what I've noticed, I'm always attracted to pioneers and people that are out to like really are game changers for the world. And I think you, Destin, Shani, and all your respected fields, Nathan as well, and Elena, like you guys, and even Diane in terms of like First Nations people and healing. It's just amazing what you are doing, groundbreaking work like on this planet. So we're going to be having like these like collected powerhouses in one room. You know,
Phenomenal.
It's quite phenomenal. So I really hope people understand the value and the heightened experience they're going to have about being with such high level human beings. It's going to be so inspirational. So yeah, just really grateful that we could collect all of you into this one room.
Well, thank you for being a trailblazer and for being that connection point for all of us, and for this soul offering that you're sharing, creating a platform for so many people to benefit from having access to all these different, all these different offerings, all these different teachings, all this different wisdom and knowledge in the realm of sexuality. Again, it's
Exactly.
an area of such wounding because of ignorance. And so it's like this event is, and what you're doing is really shining the light, bringing the light to the darkness.
Yeah.
So value and appreciate your willingness to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's just really cool because like all these people, it was kind of through that journey of myself wanting to transform and discover and interviewing all these people for the book. And so like, it's really amazing that even people from London and England and California, and you were all over the place as well, just coming into this, to be part of this book launch too is just such an honor. So I'm so blessed to have like been able to really connect profoundly on all these pioneers, like deep biographies. And what I learned from that experience was that people who are really groundbreaking, their lives are their school. Like they it's not an institution. It's not anything that's going to come and teach them how to be themselves. It's them coming with this life mission that's so strong, and they have to like butt up against all these difficult situations. But in doing that, they have this gift to offer the world. And that's what I'm really excited about, to have all these people who've done that transformation and now are having this offering that's going to be like a clearing for many other people. So excited to be that you're part of this journey with me, Devi. Big love to you. And for anyone that's interested about our Co-Creative Sex Summit, it's in the little text beside the Facebook Live. Just follow the link, co-creativesexsummit.com. And you can also follow Devi on Sex is Medicine. And if you're interested in actually becoming one of these educated, sex educators in the Tantra tradition, there's the school to go get trained. So just really happy that we could have this moment together. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, big hugs to you. And sending you lots of love. Take care. Mwah. Mwah. Okay, see you soon. Bye, everyone.